about welcoming, about receiving, and about hospitality. At first glance, it also seems to be about a reward that is offered to those who welcome rightly. If you welcome the prophet and the righteous rightly, you will get your reward. If you offer the hospitality of cold water, a first-century delight, to even the smallest of guests, you won't lose your reward. That's what seems to be offered here. And if that be the case, then this passage makes me nervous. After all, we mostly proclaim a message of grace. It is about God giving to us, and thus us passing on that same giving to others. It is about grace, God's gifts given without respect to having earned them. It is about our gracious response, being a giving people without respect to reward. What then do we make of a passage that suggests that we do something and receive a reward for it? No reason I don't put this horrifically in about stewardship season. Is this a bump in our journey of faith and grace? Do we try to fit this passage into our framework of grace somehow? Or is our framework somehow broken? I have pondered much about this sense of giving and receiving. Who really is doing the giving? How do we give? And how do we receive the gifts that are placed in our midst? Jesus talks about welcoming others in our text for today. But how do we welcome them? How do we receive them, these others, be they prophets, the righteous, or even one of the little ones? And more to the point, as we go out into the world, bearing the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as we remembered a fortnight back on Trinity Sunday, how will we be welcomed? Now, that's the real question, is it not? Jesus did his ministry representing more than just himself. And that was the trouble. Others around him saw him as just another wandering rabbi. Perhaps they saw him as a prophet or a righteous man, but they didn't want to hear about him as the one who bears the presence of the living God in human form. It was one thing to welcome Jesus the man, but Jesus, the Son of the living God, was not welcome. It was considered heresy. To welcome such a one into our presence means that we are confronted with the living God in strange and unusual ways. Like Peter or Moses or all others who find themselves face to face with God incarnate, we are likely first ashamed. All our faults are laid bare. All our thoughts are no longer secret. We fall on our faces and we cower. This kind of exposure is unwelcome, and it brings with it an unwelcome judgment and pain. We avoid this. Like Adam and Eve, we hide from it. Like Abraham, we push it and test it to see how far we can go. To welcome Jesus means to welcome this kind of scrutiny, and the world is not pleased to do this. Instead, the world rejects it. The world rejected the prophets, mistreating and killing them. This world rejects the truly righteous, relegating them to the fringe in order that they do not challenge the false righteousness of the hypocrites. The world rejects the little ones of the disciples, depriving them of food, water, clothing, and shelter, perhaps even of love. The world rejects Jesus as the Son of God, calling him instead prophet or teacher of morality, or just another failed Messiah. Certainly he is not the Son of God. That would be blasphemy, and those who claim such deserve death, even on a cross, and such is the welcome that comes from exposing the sin of the world. Such who welcome thus reap similar rewards. They reject, and so they feel rejected. They hate, and so they feel hated. Just so they miss the surprising word that comes after the word of judgment. God comes to visit, whether through prophet or son, God brings more than a cool eye for appraising each of us as we are. God also brings the grace to forgive and appraise us as we will be, as we must be, as we are being created anew each day in love. It is this transforming love that is at the center of the prophet's message, or in the righteous one's action. They proclaim a God who is ferociously just, and even more ferociously and relentlessly merciful. Slow to anger, they name this God, and abounding in steadfast or covenantal love. After the honest and forthright appraisal of our shortcomings, those who have the courage to welcome this God or this God's servant experience largesse beyond dreams or expectation. The one who is welcomed becomes the host who welcomes. How many times do we see this? The fishermen become the catch. The boy's lunch becomes the meal for thousands. The Passover meal becomes God's gift of self and grace. How many times do we have to see this before we understand it? For judgment does not get the last word. Now you might say, well, there has to be a reward. Isn't that what the ads tell us? We who endure judgment in welcoming God get the reward of grace. First, know that no gift such as grace could ever be a reward, for it is not earned. It is given. Next, know that it is God's nature to give and to create and to forgive. This is birthed of love, not of our welcome. Finally, know that God's gift of grace is given to all, even those who fail to welcome, though it does those latter precious little good. This grace is no reward. It is God's gift for all people. For all people. What then is the prophet's reward? What then is the reward of the righteous? It was one of the little disciples who taught me this. It was my nephew, Mark. I contributed to put him through Catholic schools of Sonoma County, California, because the public school system had collapsed in ruins, in which it still finds itself. I made my sister and her husband promise to vote for every school levy in the future, so that the local system might somehow be strengthened. It hasn't worked yet. When Mark was 6, he earned a great reward in his first grade classroom. I happened to be down on a visit. There was a special award day when he was given this award. He had competed against another student, a girl in his class, and they were neck and neck before he won the prize. We all went to see him at the award ceremony, but as we left, I asked if I could see his prize. He told me he didn't have it. I asked him if he had lost it, and he said, he'd given it away. I was kind of stunned. Why did you do that? He said he gave it to the girl who came in second, and he explained that she had been so disappointed that he decided to give her the prize, and in that moment I wondered what possessed my nephew to do such a thing. I asked him what he hoped to gain from giving the prize away. Even a first grader might have a crush on a girl, I thought. My nephew answered as if it were the most natural thing in the world, even as a Roman Catholic, which he is, that sometimes a good deed is its own reward. I've forgotten what the prize was that day, but I have not forgotten his words. Giving the prize away was the real prize for him that day. I could only stare at the wonder of God's love shining through and teaching me through my little nephew. Grace is its own reward. Receiving grace is not the reward for the disciples that Jesus is talking to. Giving grace is the reward of the prophet. Living grace is the reward of the righteous one. To To be refreshing water for his uncle was the reward of the little one who had tasted the cool water of God's grace deeply enough to be gracious himself. No matter whether the world rejects us or responds in grace to our grace as disciples, we can do nothing but follow our Rabbi Jesus, who is himself the Son of God. When we are welcomed, it is not we alone, but also Christ himself who is welcomed, and not Jesus alone, but also the Father who sent him. Remember that when we encounter the stranger. Our ancestors were once strangers themselves in this land. When we go out, we do not go out as ourselves, but we represent the baptismal grace of the one who sent us. We give not ourselves, but we give the lives that have been returned to us in forgiveness and love by God. We do not give in order to receive some reward, not simply because we have first received from God. Giving is its own reward, even when those whom we love and serve do not love us. But the ones who do will soon discover that they too become the giving disciples of a giving and loving God. So take what God gives freely from this very table today and ponder how that generosity will shape your own, and the peace of God which passes all human understanding